welcome to the CoreWalking podcast, a step in the right direction. I'm Alex Madelon.
And I'm Jonathan Fitzgordon.
And we're here with Jonathan's petting his cat like Dr. Evil in Austin Powers. I think we're going to talk about the IT band today, the iliotibial band, and more importantly, what the IT band does and what IT band syndrome is, which is a big issue for runners, right? But also people
issue for everyone.
Yeah. And I'm gonna be very transparent here and say that I don't actually know all that much about IT band syndrome, and I don't know a ton about the IT band. I know that it is definitely not a piece of muscle like a lot of people would have you believe or would have themselves believe, but a piece of fascia really that connects from the top of the iliac crest, so your pelvis, all the way down to essentially your foot, right? I mean, not the IT band itself, but the fascia does go all the way down the leg. And IT band syndrome is really painful for people who have had it. And it can be resolved, but it usually takes quite a while, right? Because it's usually there's a tightness somewhere. And I always feel like whenever there's a pelvic, something that's going on in the pelvis or in the hips, there's so many muscles at play in there, and they're all interconnected. And so it's really hard kind of to decipher where it's coming from, where the origin of it is, right? I mean, you can probably relieve the symptoms and address some of the tightnesses of the muscles and some of the imbalances, I should say, rather. But where is the origin, And everybody that I train almost unequivocally has a tight side and a looser side, weaker than the other side, whenever somebody's doing a squat, there's almost always a shift, right? Especially the older they are, the more of a shift there is, because I think of probably the patterns that we get stuck into, right? But I don't have a question here. I'm just really completely.
First, I want to give a shout out to my new webcam, which is a much wider angle, so people at home get to see Super Kitty. Because I used to pet the cat, but it would be off camera because
you were
a much smaller angle. So, all right, so that was a bunch to unpack. I want to come back to the sidedness. The sidedness issue, which is the issue I'm dealing with all the time. I'll start with that in a small way. I'm always helping people side to side. Like everyone tends to break down on one side of the body. Not, let's say, you fall down the stairs, you could break your left ankle and your right wrist. Like there are times where you're going to have injuries on both sides. But for the most part, from my perspective, because of the psoas, people tend to break down on one side.
Yeah.
Tight psoas messes with the upper and lower body. But the key for me in terms of how I help people is you can't just address the sides. You have to start with posture front and back. And that's like my main approach is I have to get you to stand up straight. I think everyone leans backwards in their upper body and forward in their lower body. You want to help people stack top and bottom so you transfer weight better. And once you get the top and bottom in a better place, you can then start to address the side-to-side issues, right? So that's just like referring to how beautiful is this cat? That's just referring to the last thing you said. So the IT band, right? So it's called the IT band or the IT tract, the iliotibial tract, is a piece of fascia, not a muscle. And there's a specific reason for that. So one, technically it doesn't go down to the foot, but like you said, there is something called the fascia lata. right? And that is the outer fascia. And the way the body works in terms of fascia, everything in the body is connected through fascia.
Right.
And it's in an insane way. In other words, directly under the surface of our skin is something called the subcutaneous fascia. It's the entire body. And then if every muscle is made up of 100,000 fibers, give or take, right? That's just like a made up number. Every one of those fibers is wrapped in fascia. And then the muscle itself is wrapped in fascia. And then like if there's four quadriceps, right? All four of those quads are wrapped in fascia. So fascia is just all over the body. And there's this thing called the fascia lata, the outer fascia. And the IT band is a part of the fascia lata, right? So that's like the distinction that the iliotibial tract is part of the outer fascia. So then you have iliotibial, ilium to the tibia. So that is the specific um, space of the IT band. It attaches, like you said, on the iliac crest, and then it attaches to the tibia, which is the big fat bone of the shin, right? Tibia, big fat bone, fibula, the outer bone, which is a much smaller bone and not a weight-bearing bone. So embedded into or part of the IT band is a muscle called the tensor fascia lata, right? The TFL. And the IT band syndrome that you mentioned almost always manifests at the knee,
Mm.
right? That the pain from IT band syndrome usually comes at the knee. But the truth is, tons of people I'm working with are having TFL issues. So that might not be classified exactly as IT band syndrome, but that's still a problem with the IT band.
Right.
And for me, there's something really fascinating about the fact that it's fascia and not muscle. So why the body being just an extraordinary thing, it makes all these strange and interesting accommodations within it. So, we have a kneecap, the patella bone, right? The
Right.
kneecap is basically the only function of the kneecap really is to protect the knee joint. But the kneecap is embedded in the tendons of the quadricep. And then below the kneecap, it's the patella ligament. And the bone that's inserted there, that patella, it makes the quadricep stronger because it has a bone in it. It's known as the sesamoid bones. We have them in our toes, right? So like because we have a bone embedded into this muscle slash tendon slash ligament, it's becomes stronger. That's like one of these interesting pieces of anatomy. Another interesting, I'll get to the IT band and why that's interesting, but another really interesting piece of our anatomy is the rectus abdominis, our sit-ups muscle, right? Our sit-ups muscle, it's the six pack or the eight pack or a 10 pack, however you want to look at it. And that rectus abdominis attaches from the base of the rib cage to the pubic bone.
Hmm.
And why it's an eight pack or a six pack, it's because there are these little muscles and they have tendons inserted between them. So that's why it becomes a pack. And that's actually why um, you can see it as a six pack, because when you build those muscles and you make them harder or bigger, the tendons don't change. So the muscles pop out from the tendons. So you can see it as the six pack. So why are there tendons inserted in between these muscles? Because the way the body works is muscle needs bone to help it function. But between the pelvis and the rib cage, there are just the only bones are the five lumbar vertebrae, and they're not really connected to the rectus abdominis. So, in order for the rectus abdominis to span from the rib cage to the pubic bone and still function, the body inserts these tendons to make the muscle strong enough so it can translate all that distance and still work. So I think that's a really cool letting the annoying cat out, and I'm sure he's gonna want to come back in. Uh, so that's how the rectus abdominis works, right? It could not work by itself over such a long span. The IT band is not dissimilar. So the IT band runs down the leg, doesn't run in front of the leg, right? It runs down the side of the leg. So it also doesn't have bone to help it. So no muscle could run from the iliac crest all the way to the tibia and function successfully. It's too long of a journey. Like the longest muscle in the body is the sartorius, which runs
Yeah.
from the pelvis to the inner knee. But because it crosses the femur, it can function as long as it is. It's also a really weak muscle, right? But because it crosses the femur, it can get its job done. But the IT band doesn't have that help. So instead of it being muscle, the body has put this fascia there, and into the fascia, it is embedded a small little muscle called the tensor fasciae lata, the tensor of the fascia lata, the tensor of the outer fascia. So that every step we take, when the knee lifts off the floor, that muscle tightens or engages, and it brings tension to the IT band. It brings tension to the whole strip of fascia, and it stabilizes the knee so it can get forward to the next step, right? So that's like the function of the IT band is to stabilize the knee and extension.
Yeah.
Sound good?
Uh-huh.
Great. So why do people suffer there, right? I believe, as I believe with everything, people suffer because they have terrible posture.
That's actually
And
it's from everything I've
um,
read, that is entirely correct.
say that again.
Most people would agree with you from everything that I've read about the IT ban, which in fairness
I,
isn't a ton, but I have done some of my research.
I like when people agree with me.
Yeah, I know you do.
Um,
That's why I said it.
so when we stand in poor this gets really interesting, right? Because like the IT bend, for me, old U posture, new U posture. Old U posture is where people sink their thighs forward and lean their upper body backwards. It's how I think almost everybody stands. And I am trying to get them to stack. When you stand that way, your bones don't stack successfully. I am trying to get people to stack their bones to create what we call a plumb line from the ear to the shoulder to the hip to the knee to the ankle, straight line up and down. I'm actually giving up a bit on the ear because everyone's got forward head posture, and it's actually too hard to get people to change their head at least for a bunch of months before I can really start to say, maybe you want to take your head back. So we want to align the bones up and down. When we do that successfully, when we get the femur bone, the big fat femur of the leg, when we get that directly under the hip, right? Which means it's also directly under the lumbar. When we do that, the line of the IT band follows exactly along the line of the femur.
Right.
When we are in old U posture, right, where the thighs sink forward, the IT band is behind the femur. And this is an interesting thing for me because one of the ways I look at it is I say that muscle accommodates bad posture in a way that the IT band does not.
Right.
So that if you're sinking your thighs forward, yes, your hamstrings and quads are going to get messed up alignment wise, but they're just going to go along with the program, right? They're going to shift forward. The hamstring shifts forward, the quadricep extends a little bit or lengthens or whatever. The IT band doesn't. So the IT band stays exactly where it is, and the legs go forward. The femur goes forward. So that basically yanks the IT band backwards and the TFL with it. So I actually think that is one of the biggest issues with IT band problems is that poor posture messes with the IT band in a way that it doesn't mess with muscles, even though poor posture messes with muscles as well. And I think most people run the way they walk, which is poorly,
Yeah.
right? Like keep on trucking guy. So that if you're running that way, you're yanking the IT band backwards with every stride you take, and that will ultimately translate into the knee. It will ultimately translate into the attachment of the IT band into the tibia, and that is why IT band syndrome is in that is mostly manifest for runners, everybody, but runners get it particularly, and that's why the pain manifests at the base at the knee. How's that?
It's a lot to unpack.
It is, isn't it?
You're
Uh,
unpacking, and that leaves a lot to unpack. No, but I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I think, are you talking about then people have a posterior pelvic tilt, right? Where the pelvic tilts backwards?
so that's
The
yes,
top of the pelvis tilts
absolutely, but
backwards.
not only, right? It's not like people with an anterior tilt take their thighs back. It's kind of weird. Like you can have your thighs jamming forward with an anterior tilt in the same way that you can have it with a posterior tilt.
I feel like if you have an anterior tilt and your thighs are jamming forward, your TFL is even tighter, probably, because
Uh,
because
yeah, I would find that.
that
I would
space
find
is reduced. So it's probably even worse to have that. But it's funny you talk about running because I have a coworker who's new to running, and she was like, "Can you look at my running form and tell me if it's okay?" And she started running, and she was running like, super straight, and you can see what I'm doing, and like, I'm just like throwing her legs forward of her body. And I was like, she's like, yeah, because my knees hurt when I'm done running, like even if I do a 5K. And I'm like, this is why. And I explained to her, kind of like you need to lean forward, almost like catch yourself repeatedly, instead of like throwing your legs forward, like let yourself almost fall forward. And she said she did that this weekend, and she's like, it felt awesome on my knees. And I'm like, there you go.
so great.
Yeah. So it's
Technically,
just it's just like that thing of like just leaning into it a little bit instead of like resisting wanting to run. You know what I mean? It's like I'm like, just relax your body. Your knees are hurting because your body's tight, because you're like almost resisting the run.
no question. I would also probably hazard that she's running on the outer foot and all that, but I
Yeah.
do want to make a point about running and like I could tell already this is an episode that we can load up the show page with lots of videos and pictures and stuff. Um, do you know the runner Ben Johnson?
Yeah.
There has never been anyone more upright than him,
No,
right?
you're talking about Michael Johnson.
Michael Johnson, thank you so
Yeah.
much. He is extraordinary to watch, right?
Yeah.
He is so fast and he is so upright.
So
Like,
straight.
yeah,
So
so
stiff.
straight. What's that?
So stiff.
Totally. And
Yeah.
yet insanely fast. So there's an exception to every rule,
No,
right?
that's no question. There's no question that there's an exception to every rule. Like it's super weird to watch him run and to think like he can run 200 meters in 19.6 or whatever, but it's unusual. It's you
It
know.
is. It's totally unusual. But I always like to point out like um there's a genius to certain people that are going to be accommodated, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm working with a runner um who was an elite athlete in 1990 in the Olympics.
Mhm.
And she wasn't taught anything. She just ran. And she had a natural talent. They spotted it when she was 7 years old, and she set every record in the country, and no one taught her how to do it. They only maximized what was there naturally, the God-given talent, if you will.
Right.
They don't do that anymore. You know, like if you have that God-given talent, they are going to then harness it with technique.
Right.
And the thing is that she is paying for still running, not competitively, but she's paying for that lack of technique physically, right? And That's fascinating to me because I believe in both. That um, I am not a naturally gifted athlete, but I am. My technique in whatever I do is really good because it's what I teach. So I'm not going to break down physically, and I marvel at people who are natural athletes. I just marvel at it. I love it. I'm so blown away. Like, I think I'm a pretty smart dude, and I trade that in for athletic talent in a
Really?
heartbeat. I'd happily be the dumbest guy in the room if I could be
Oh,
the best hockey player.
I guess
Um,
I guess that makes sense because if you were the dumbest guy in the room, you probably wouldn't know you were.
Yeah, no doubt. I was telling this to my son the other day. I back in the day, I was at a therapist office, and I said, I think I have delusions of grandeur. And she said, why? And I said, I don't know. I walked down the street, and I'm like, I could be president if I wanted. And she said, well, you might be able to be president if you want, but the main thing I'll tell you is people with delusions don't think they have them. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. Um,
That's actually very funny.
yeah, isn't that great? So back to the IT band. So we need to get new U posture to have the IT band align successfully with the femur for it to work best. The other thing that happens is there's a certain amount of internal rotation for the TFL. The TFL, tensor fascial latae, it's a minor hip flexor, it's a minor internal rotator. It has internal rotation to it. But if you're leaning your thighs forward and running, and your IT band is getting pulled backwards, the whole thing is being externally rotated.
Right.
And that is going to mess with both the hip, the knee, the IT band. So we need to get the legs under the hip so that that IT band complex, including the TFL, wrap forward when we move. And a
Right.
lot of that is walking through the inner foot.
Yeah.
I've been making some TikToks lately. I made some TikToks like, I don't know, probably 2 years ago. And then I have no, last week, I've been actually watching. Here's a shout out to Jeff Pearlman. Are you familiar with him? He's a sports writer.
No.
He's an author. He makes the best TikToks. Like, it's just him talking onto his phone and he's just telling stories. And he is so amazing. And I was like, oh, I could do that. I'll just tell stories. Like, I don't have to, you know, think too much about it. So I've made a couple. So I made one today. I don't even think I posted it yet on the windlass mechanism. Are you familiar with the windlass mechanism?
No. Yes.
So
Yes.
pick yes, one or the
But
other.
I can't think of why.
So it's really a cool thing in our body, right? Because I think if you walk on the outer foot, you're not really going to take advantage of the magic of the IT band. You got to walk through the inner foot. You got to push off the big toe. So the windlass mechanism is this idea that, our foot is a spring arch, right? It drops, it lifts, it drops, it lifts, it drops, it lifts. It's magical. So when the arch lifts, when we're walking, all of the bones of the foot lock in on each other and they become like this solid structure to take us to the next step. And that only happens if you walk through the big toe. So when the big toe dorsiflexes, right, which is flexes, like lifts, like if you're standing and it lifts up, or you're walking and the toe is down and the heel is up, that's dorsiflexion. When you're doing that successfully, the plantar fascia at the sole of the foot, it tightens. And as the plantar fascia tightens, that's the windlass effect. It pulls the arch up and it makes it solid.
Hmm.
And that allows us to go to the next step. But, from my perspective, people are not walking through their inner foot. They're not walking off the big toe. They're not pushing off through the big toe. And
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the number of people who walk kind of any degree of like duck footedness, you know, there's no way they're walking through the inner foot. So,
that's it.
and I think there's more of the population walks that way than not.
Oh, no question about it. And then here's another crazy, this is just wild, right? Um,
And that
Client,
makes your like TFL super tight. I don't, if
it
I
totally
like
does. Oh,
biomechanically, if I'm thinking of the chain, like, you
no
know,
doubt. It's outer hip dominance, inner thigh lack of dominance, right? It's an
right,
imbalance in inner and outer thigh. I get
100%.
a new client, and one of the things, you have to send me videos of your walking, right?
Yeah.
So in the intake first session, she's like, "Well, I had this pain, so they gave me orthotics." And my first thing is, I'm not such a big fan of orthotics.
Yeah. I
Don't get
know.
rid of them, right? Don't just throw them out. But like, let's see what happens. So she sends me the video, and I'm telling her like, you got to walk through the inner foot, yada yada yada. She sends me a video walking with the orthotics. They don't let her get anywhere near the inner foot. The orthotic, right? In the
Yeah.
way it lifts her arch, it pulls her into supination. So in the video, there is
Oh,
the walking with the orthotic in the shoe and then walking in a shoe without the orthotic. And all of a sudden, she can just get to the inner foot. She can get to the inner foot. And then, I give the same rap all the time, which is that doctor that gave you the orthotic meant well. What a terrible thing to do. What a just useless thing to do, right? Because the use of that orthotic didn't even let her walk even remotely well. And once she took the orthotic out, she was able to feel what it was I was trying to get her to do. And
But
that's
did the
what.
orthotics make her feel better?
No, she didn't actually think they did. They weren't solving the problem, which is how she found her way to me.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Um, but for me, that's fascinating stuff. Somebody just sent me what I've been doing lately in my the walking videos that I've been really enjoying is you send me a walking video and I juxtapose old you and new you, one on top of the other.
Hmm.
And it's really cool to see. I try to sync it up. So someone sent me a running video, running in shoes, right? And then running in socks, right? So barefoot, but she just left her socks on. And the bottom, I'm just thinking of the video, the shoe video, the shoe one, it's not even that she was running that badly, right? She wasn't running as much to the inner foot as I would like necessarily, but she was running to the inner foot. But the minute she took off the shoes, it is the most extraordinary difference. I'll ask her if I can actually use the video. Um, the way I described it to her is like you look like a gazelle, right?
Oh yeah.
The shoes are gone, you're automatically finding the inner foot and you're flying, right? That the push off from the inner foot was so stunning. And it really did look like a gazelle, like it was like a leaping through the air that she just could not get with the shoes. So I thought that I'm not advocating for everyone to take off their shoes, but I do believe in running in minimal shoes. Like I'm really a big fan of that. Um, so yeah, running through the outer foot is going to mess with the IT band and take you out of its best use or best function. But again, the why runners suffer from IT band syndrome more than walkers do is just the fact that running is pounding, right?
Yeah.
Running is a better way. When I work with people, I say if you're up for running, you're going to be able to make these patterns happen faster. Because running to me is just fast walking,
Right.
right? That's how I get people to run. I work with people who are like, I can't run anymore. And I'm like, look, first you're going to learn how to walk. But once you learn how to walk, I'll show you how to run because all it is walk faster. And I will literally do that. I'll say, walk faster, walk faster, walk faster. Eventually you're running, and the way I do that with people is like walk a block, run a block, walk a block, run a block, walk a block, run 2 blocks once you're ready, like
Right.
you add on until then you're no longer walking. Um, my son is running cross country and he's got shin splints and hip problems, right? Shin splints and IT band.
But
And
he's like you. He's got the looseness in his joints that you have, right?
well, plus he won't listen to me, so that's another thing.
Why would he listen to you?
Yeah,
You're
exactly. Um, but it's fascinating to see, and his coaches are not teaching him. His coaches are great. Like they've created this amazing culture on the team, and like he loves his teammates. And I don't want to knock his hockey team, but there is not the same culture in the hockey team that there is in the running team. But they're not teaching him technique, right? Like what he said, I saw a picture of him and I'm like, your chin is just up. And he's like, they tell me to run with my head up. And I'm like, you run with your head up from the back of the neck, not from the front of the chin, right? Like they're not wrong for
yeah,
saying head up, right? But I'm like, when you lift your chin, you're cutting off your breath. If you lengthen your neck,
it's like
yeah,
this.
exactly. You're
Right?
getting
Yeah.
access to your breath. Like it's just different, right? But technique being everything. So the
IT band.
IT band. So why the IT band goes south? For the most part, I think it is poor posture. But I work with tons of people who it's def if you have TFL problems, you have IT band problems, right? But in my yoga classes, I teach simple TFL stuff all the time. I just call them TFL leg lifts, standing up and taking your leg out to the side, right? With internal rotation to fire up and activate the TFL. That's first stage. Like you got to be able to feel it and get in there and use it.
Well, you think it's the TFL isn't firing when you have an IT band problem, or is the TFL is too tight?
It can be both.
It's both. It's too tight and therefore not firing,
Or too tight, or not firing,
or both.
or uh,
Glutes aren't
it
firing.
can, it can be overloaded without being too tight, depending upon the nature of your musculature. In other words, if your inner thighs, in other words, my TFL has never been tight. No, there
Nothing
aren't
on
tight
yours ever
muscles in
tight.
my body. I am too loose.
Yeah,
But I also had no tone in my inner thighs. Right?
right.
So because I had no tone in my inner thighs, my TFL and IT band and ultimately my knees suffered.
Right.
When I got tone in my inner thighs, I no longer suffered, and then my TFL started working better. But that wasn't a tight loose issue, right? It was just like it was like you mentioned before, it was that imbalance between the inner and outer thigh.
Yeah. Yeah, because they
Uh,
say a lot of the literature says, you have to release your vastus lateralis, which is the part of the quadriceps that's on the outside, because it'll get tight, because that's the outside musculature, and that should help, and then strengthen the inner thighs and strengthen the glutes. Glutes are always never strong enough, it seems like, or they can be strong enough, but just never firing enough.
well, there are a lot of reasons for that, right? For
Because I see a lot of
me,
people with like, I work in the gym, so a lot of people have big glutes. They're really beautiful looking. I'm not sure they're doing much work though. You know what I mean? Like,
that's exactly right. You can have a big butt without having a strong butt.
yeah,
But don't forget, like, you got a couple of things going on, right? What is the opposite of the gluteus maximus? It's the psoas, agonist
mm,
antagonist, right? If your psoas is tight, right, which is like externally rotating your leg, it's going to be hard to find access to gluteus maximus if you have a tight psoas. And we usually have a tight one tighter than the other. And that creates more imbalance, right? So that's gluteus maximus. Then a huge problem for people is gluteus medius. Oh, I love those glasses.
they're
Um,
the best.
a huge problem for people is gluteus medius and minimus.
Right.
And then when it gets into anatomy, what people just because I do it too. You just say the glutes, right?
Yeah.
But you got three glutes, two of which have one function, and the other one has a completely different function.
Yeah.
Right? So gluteus maximus is an extensor, like the hamstrings. Gluteus medius and minimus are internal and external rotators and stabilizers of the pelvis. So where psoas messes with gluteus maximus, from my perspective, piriformis messes with gluteus medius and minimus. So
Yeah, because it's a rotator.
when say again.
It's a rotator as well.
So it's a weird thing, right? Gluteus piriformis is an external rotator, and
Yeah.
it's grouped with the lateral rotators of the hip. It's considered a lateral rotator. But when you look at a picture of the lateral rotators, the obturators, the gemellis and stuff, they're lateral, they're straight. The
Yeah.
piriformis is actually an oblique muscle. It runs on an angle. So it's just weird that to me in a way that and that's purely visually, that it's grouped with the lateral rotators. It is an external rotator. Like its main function on a certain level is, well, it's turning out the leg, right? But getting in and out of a car. That's your piriformis action. It's why people with sciatica suffer so terribly getting in and out of cars, right? Because piriformis is often sciatic pain is often piriformis syndrome, if not sciatica. So to me, gluteus medius, minimus, and piriformis are all living in that same area, right? So just the way a tight psoas is going to inhibit gluteus maximus, a tight piriformis is going to inhibit medius and minimus.
Right. Makes sense.
And um, from my perspective, an inhibited gluteus medius, I just don't even, I teach gluteus minimus, but I really don't talk about it much. Uh, Gluteus medius gets my attention. Uh, Inhibited gluteus medius to me is responsible for so much back pain,
Right.
so much sciatic pain, so much dysfunction. And that's why clamshells are just a key exercise for me, just to try to wake up gluteus medius, right? But you mentioned vastus lateralis. When it comes to the quads, I'm hyper focused on the rectus femoris, the only quad that attaches to the pelvis. And I think when we have that thigh forward posture, we are just tormenting rectus femoris, asking it to hold us up, just filling it with tension. So I also think to get the IT band into a better place, to get the glutes to work, you have to change the tone of rectus femoris, which you really can't do if you don't change your posture.
Right. Because that's the one that is gonna kind of travel forward more
Yeah, that's exactly right.
if the pelvis is tilted one way or another. But
Um,
so
yep.
what do you do aside? I guess let's say you can't you need a more immediate solution than changing your entire posture and walking because that's going to take a while, right?
Well, it's all connected, right?
Yeah.
But if you want one thing to do, it's do bridge with a block between the thighs
Mm-hmm.
and learn how to do bridge. Because I think everyone does bridge wrong, right? It's one of the universal things I see in everyone I work with. I think everyone thinks bridge is a glute max pose, and I
Yeah.
do not think bridge is a glute max pose, right? So
It's a
I
Pilates.
think someone is laying on the floor, and you say, and this is a gym thing, it's a yoga thing, it's an exercise thing, it's a universal thing. They're on the floor, they're on their feet. Let's say you start with your feet even and parallel, and then somebody says, come up to bridge. It's all thrust, it's all gluteus maximus that pulls you to your outer foot. It takes your knee wider than your ankle and sit bone, takes you out of the inner thighs, and then it starts pulling the IT band and TFL backwards the same way bad standing does.
Yep, that makes
So
sense.
it's
It
one
all
of my
connects.
first things, right? I say, show me your bridge, though I know what's going to happen. And then I say, come up, not even with the block yet, come back up to bridge. And now stick your butt out and lower your hips like an inch, which is so counterintuitive to people.
Yeah.
But the minute you do that, you get out of gluteus maximus, you get into the inner foot, you bring your knees in a little bit, you open up your SI joint, and you wrap that IT band and TFL forward. And that is the bridge I'm talking about. And that's what I'm teaching. Now, the thing is, to do that, you are likely lowering your pelvis in a way that you don't feel like you're in bridge anymore. And I do hear that from yoga people, which is, wait, bridge is about elevating the spine, which it is, but it's not about elevating the spine by gripping your butt, right? It's
Yeah.
about getting out of your gluteus maximus to then learn how to elevate the spine and bridge, which I love bridge. It's like the main back bend I teach nowadays. I've been teaching a lot of Cobra lately. I'm really into Cobra. Um, Technically, bridge, you're supposed to drop over from shoulder stand.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of shoulder stand and headstand. I'm trying to get back to my advanced yoga, and we talked about my inability to lose weight last episode, and
Last 25 episodes.
so it's really made my inversions difficult. But I'm really getting back into shoulder stand and headstand. I'm doing them daily. And I have to say, I was in teacher training yesterday and we were working on Navasana to Ardha Navasana,
Hmm.
one of my favorite poses because it's all core and then you Ardha Navasana takes you out of your psoas and you really feel your core kick in. And for a long time, it's been I used all of these poses were like show off poses for me, and then I lost my way. Um, but for a long time, I was struggling going from Ardha Navasana back up to Navasana. And yesterday, I was like, "Oh, hello,"
All right, so you got it.
starting to come back a little bit. So that felt good.
Good news.
Yeah, very good news. So bridge is one of the main ways I'm teaching people how to change their glutes, how to change their IT band, and then I put a block between the thighs. And I say that for me, my story is knee surgeries, post knee surgeries. Um, I is how I discovered that I had no inner thighs and I walk like a duck and I walk like the keep on trucking guy. And
Yep.
I learned how to do block with a bridge between my feet and my thighs for 5 minutes, fully engaging my inner thighs until it was effortless. And when I was able to do that for 5 minutes with no effort, I knew I was in a much better place. And it took me a long time. And one of the main things that would happen is I would keep squeezing the block. And at first, after 2 minutes, then after 3 minutes, gluteus maximus would try to take over. And I'd have to squeeze a little more and ask gluteus maximus kindly to stop doing what it was trying to do. And then eventually I could do 5 minutes and with no effort. It just became easy. I did a cycling workshop yesterday to indulge my love of cycling.
Hmm.
And you know what I was talking about there? It's 75 degrees here today. I'm cycling as soon as we're done. I'm so psyched. When I first started my ride, my main ride, I have two rides, 10 miles, 20 miles, right? When I
Yeah.
first started my 10-mile ride, one, I could not keep my hands on my handlebars the whole time. I had to sit up in the saddle and take a break, halfway through, three-quarters of the way through. And it took me a few months before I could do all 10 miles with no break. But that's the nature of getting stronger, right? And then when I started doing 20 miles, I couldn't lean forward for the whole 20 miles. I had to take that same break. And when I first started 10 miles, I'd have to sit on the couch for an hour when I was done. Like it wiped me out. And then a few months in, I'm like, oh my God, this is easy. And I feel better after a ride than before. So that's just the nature of getting stronger in anything. So
Yeah.
in the same way with the bridge, to build my inner thighs, it took me a long time to get to that 5 minute. I like timers, right? It took me a long time to get to that 5 minutes where it was effortless. And at that moment, I knew I had really changed everything about my legs and my hips. And, my knees, I've been doing a lot of squatting lately. My knees bark at me once in a while, but, my knees are fine. 15 years after three knee surgeries, right? Like, they work really well. So,
Why do your knees hurt when you squat?
I'm doing these squats. I've been watching this guy on YouTube. I put him in the category of men on YouTube who don't wear shirts,
Oh yeah.
which I think is really funny, but he's really good. So he teaches squatting um so I'm doing these squats where you're in a deep squat and then you touch your knee to the floor
Yeah.
alternately. And I think that kind of like tweaks my knees out a little bit,
Yeah.
which doesn't mean that it won't get better. But I was really surprised because I haven't felt anything in my knees for years. And then doing that, like if I rollerblade for an hour, my left knee will throb for about 10 minutes. Not pain, just like wah, 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 and it'll stop.
Right.
That has never gone away. But I don't blade a lot. But when I blade, I blade my same bike path. Um, so I get that in my left knee. Other than that, I have not felt any knee problems at all. So the I do believe my knees talking to me lately is from these squats, but I love them. They're like really cool. And it's
Yeah.
all about hip stuff. Like, do you know what oh my God, I'm spacing on it. I think I talked about it last time. Shin
No.
box exercise, where you create a 90-degree angle of your shins and you go side to side
Oh
and
yeah.
you sit up.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of those, and I'm wondering they might be messing with my knee. But
I
I
think
think,
it's I think it's a squat because the
yeah,
squat
me too.
the squat has it takes so much internal rotation from your hip that you probably end up doing some of the rotation from your knee. That's what
I
I think.
totally, that's exactly right. But I feel
But I
like the
think with
shin
the
box
windshield
exercise,
wiper thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, say again.
No, with the windshield wiper thing, I think it's a lot easier to be within your hip and not rotating on your knees, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense.
Because you're not trying to like I think with the when you're squatting, you're trying to get your knee all the way down to the ground. And if to get that extra little bit, you're gonna be that's like an ego thing, also like if you want to get your knee as far down as you can. So you might be borrowing from like the rotation, the borrowing some of the rotation from the knee, if that makes sense. Where I think
It totally does. So
you can't do as much of that when you're doing the windshield wiper thing or the
I
body.
started with blocks,
Yeah, that makes
touching my knees to blocks
yeah.
before I then now do to the floor. But like if I'm teaching them in a yoga class, because I don't think that's an easy action, I'll set up the blocks and we'll do three and I'll do two on a block and then get rid of the block for the third one. Or
Right.
when I'm doing them by myself, but I feel like between the windshield wiper thing and the squatting knees to the floor, that's just juicing up my hip sockets in
Oh yeah.
such a nice way.
That's
And then
right.
if you want to age well, right, you want juicy hip sockets. So
Juicy hip sockets. Oh
yeah.
my God.
Um,
That's the best. That should be that should be the name of our band.
yes, I like it.
Juicy hip.
Um, so all right, back to the IT band. There's something I talk about in terms of sleep and in terms of the body that we know more in the last 10 years than we did in the prior 150 years.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary. And in the next 10 years, we're going to know more, right? So the
100.
IT band, it, I don't know how to put it, but it never got the respect it deserved, right? Like when people are looking at running and jumping and moving, it never got the respect it deserved in terms of science and understanding. But now the IT band is really getting a look, right? And one of the things that they're realizing about it is that it is designed for running, that it's a spring. and it's a serious aid in locomotion, and it just
Right.
hasn't been looked at that way. So that I think is a really interesting thing. It's a a major part of the running system, you know. And then it gets into like what your take on evolution and why we bipedal and whether or not we're born to run. And I'm really into that stuff and subsistence hunting, right? Like that we came down from the trees and we needed more complex food. And the way we hunted was we chased animals until they died, you know. And I love that. That's a theory about evolution and the way we progressed, and that we sweat through our pores and animals don't, right? So we can just tire them out. We didn't have weapons. We could just tire them out, you know. We can outrun them long distance where we obviously cannot outrun them short distance.
Right.
So that's just really interesting stuff. Before we had shoes, and we're doing this subsistence hunting, I would like to think we were running much better. Like our technique was better. And in that context, like I would like to think that, a million years ago or 500,000 years ago or whatever number you want to put to it, we were using our IT bands in a much more effective way than modern man uses them because shoes mess us up. Shoes are
Yeah.
one of the things that lead us to poor posture. So that's a cool thing about the IT band. That's new. But here's another thing about the IT band, like a science fact that's new that like boggles my mind, right? Um, when we are in new U posture, when we stand well, right? If you think of the body as being a big mass of tension and all lines of tension holding itself up, right? When we stand well, the IT band is taking on 50% of the torque of the body, right? It's like doing 50% of the work to hold the body
Right.
up. That's a cool thing. And then the other 50% is distributed elsewhere, like, you know, postural muscles, psoas, pelvic floor, multifidus, blah, blah, blah. Okay. When we have bad posture, when you're an old you are then asking the IT band to do 90% of that work, right? So when you want to know why is the IT band messed up in so many people, that is reason enough right there. Poor posture puts so much more of a demand on the IT band than good posture. And this stuff gets so simple on a certain level, right? Muscles have a job to do. And when one muscle can't do its job, another muscle is going to do the job for it. As soon as a muscle is compensating, a strong muscle is compensating for a weak muscle, not only is the weak muscle not doing its job, but the strong muscle isn't doing its job nearly as well because it can't do two jobs, right? So when you
Right.
sink your thighs forward and ask your IT band to hold your body up, basically it's not going to run well because it's no longer holding you up well,
Right.
right? And that's compensatory patterns are why the body breaks down, and I just look at it like I'm telling all my clients, we're looking to build a better body. That's it. And another one of my phrases is rebuilding your body is like a science project that you have to take the approach of it's just very literal, right? What does my IT band do? How do I align it so it does what it's supposed to do? Right? Why do I want to walk through the inner foot? I want to walk through the inner foot so it accesses the windlass mechanism, which yanks that inner arch up and locks the foot so I can go forward. Once I hopefully, because I want to teach people how their body works, right? So you want to build a better body? I'm going to show you. You have to learn to walk through the inner foot. Why do you have to learn to walk through the inner foot? Because when you walk through the inner foot, you start using your foot as designed. and you get
Right.
that lock in the arch and in the spring in the arch and the spring in your step. And when you walk through the outer foot, you do not get it. Same thing with the IT band. When your legs sink forward, it takes the IT band out of its main function and it forces it to hold your body up. And then all of a sudden, it can't do what it's meant to do, which is run you through life.
Well, that was a lot of information. I think we'll maybe end there for today. And
That's great, man. I thought I was exhausted when we began, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to talk at all. And now I am energized. I'm ready to
yeah,
go
you're
for
gonna go.
another hour.
That sounds good. Save that energy for maybe next month. Because I think there's a lot to unpack, and unfortunately, between you and me, I have to leave momentarily to go to another one of my sessions
Oh, really, Alex?
and maybe teach someone. I had another person today on how to walk because I did teach somebody this morning how to walk. And she
That is
was like,
great.
"Oh, this is gonna get rid of my hip pain." I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, it might not get rid of it, but it'll certainly alleviate it because the way you walk now is like you're just bumbling around. Like you gotta walk with a little bit more purpose, but also a little bit more relaxed, like, so anyway, so I taught her I basically everything you said today in essence, because she has like trochanteric bursitis. She has like gluteal tendonitis. I'm not even sure how to.
Look, what are all these itises, right? What is a
Yeah,
bursitis? Bursa is a fluid-filled sac between two bones, and it
inflammation of the
gets
bursa.
inflamed. Why does it get inflamed? Because you're not aligning those two bones correctly.
Correct.
You know, there's such like, look, I get it that these things get complicated, but in large part, these things are also pretty simple.
No, it's simple, but it's like it's only complicated because we keep talking about unpacking, but you're unpacking, like, she's 64. It's 63 years of bad habits, like she's been walking
No
for
question
63
about
years.
it.
I'm not going to fix her in 63 minutes. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah,
just,
like, most of my clients are older, right?
yeah,
I'm working with this 36-year-old dude lately. I'm like, dude, you don't get how lucky you are because you figure this stuff out now. The rest of your life is going to be so much better and easier. When you try to figure this stuff out at 64, like,
yeah,
you can do it, there's no question, but it's harder, and those patterns are just so much more ingrained.
yeah. I think that's the conclusion we come to, like, every almost, not every time, but often enough, and it's true that I have a 78-year-old client. She's in good shape, actually, considering that she's 78. But she has osteoporosis, and her wife has osteoporosis, and she's like, Alex, you have to tell all your younger female clients that they have to continue to do this stuff, like, for their whole life, because osteoporosis is it's not a joke. It is serious stuff. She's very cute. I love her, but she's right. It's like, and it's basically harkens to what you just said, which is that better to take care of it now than wait until you have osteoporosis and then you're just trying to minimize the deleterious effects
No
rather than
question
actually
about
prevent it. You
And
know.
yoga is great for osteoporosis. Weight bearing is great for osteoporosis. All right, well, I am going to go for a bike ride on this stunning 75-degree day, not
75-year-old dude.
75-year-old. And you go work with another client. So it's
I
been a
am,
pleasure as
unfortunately, but I
always.
am gonna ride my bike there, so I'll get a little bit of a bike ride because it is
Excellent. Wait,
79
so you
degrees.
had gotten your bike stolen. You have a new bike?
No, I just ride city bikes.
Excellent. Do you like
But I
them?
like it. I like it because I don't have to take the guesswork out of where to put it, how, all that stuff. So
That's great. Do you do the e-bike or the regular bike?
yeah, e-bike, because the regular bikes are. I can't go up a bridge on the regular bike. It weighs like 90,000 pounds, and it's just clunky, So
Yeah, totally.
it's just you can't. It's fine if you've never ridden a bike before and you don't know what it's like, but if you know what riding a bike is like, that shit is not like riding a bike. So
No, that's really interesting. All right, Alex.
all right. So anyway, before we go, please, if you've liked what we've said and you like the previous podcasts as well, please leave us a rating and a review. We really count on you to do that so that we can continue to put these out every month. That's the plan, right? Putting them out every month in the first day or two of the month. And so please go and leave us a rating or review if you have any questions about the stuff we've talked about that you can address directly to us at info@corewalking.com. And feel free, that's info@corewalking.com. And if there's something you'd like for us to talk about, please feel free to send us suggestions. We love to talk about stuff, and particularly stuff exercise and anatomy related. So until next time, Jonathan, great to see you and great to talk to you. I'll see you in a few weeks, I guess.
Always a pleasure, Alex. Thanks to everybody for listening and watching, since we're now putting the videos up on YouTube.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Have a great day.
All right, take it easy. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.